everyone, and hello all. Prof. Doc Eber here, and I have quite the exciting video to bring to you today. I have a few theories to share that are a bit intermingled with one another, but the biggest I think has to do with the DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now, there is no outright confirmation of DLC, but it is taken with the assumption that similar to the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, we'll see some form of expansion in the vein of the third versions of Scarlet and Violet. That, and plus some more information we'll go over in this video, will make this case. Now, the DLC being a thing is not a point of the video, apart from it, my friends. I believe this DLC, though, is going to be centered on, or feature, Kalos. But not just that, as I think this fact ties into some old theories that I've had centered around not just Kalos, but Hoenn, Alola, and beyond. Let's dive into things. First things first, I want to mention this theory will include spoilers for Scarlet and Violet's main and post-game stories. This will also include talking about the stories of X, Y, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, Ultra Moon, and Ultra Sun, and finally Masters, but since those games are either nearing 10 years old, are remakes of games that are even older, are on consoles that are now dead, or are a mobile gacha game, I think it's kind of okay to talk about these now. And now, since these theories are intermingled with large swaths of plot details from XY, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, Sun and Moon, and beyond, my theories on how the Scarlet and Violet DLC will have to be explained after I explain the former for it all to make sense, since there are a lot of small details that are going to come back around. I know this video seems a little long for the subject, but I promise it'll be worth it. Also, I do want to preface that this theory isn't foolproof, and I do know of a few points that could counter some points of the theory, so I'll include those as well after the main theory card to encourage conversation, as there could most definitely be more information out there to help prove or disprove it. Okay, so what prompted this video? Well, I was browsing the Pokemon board of 4chan VP, and I know, it's an awful place. I mainly take peeks there and then, because new information tends to disperse there quicker than any other place on the internet. So I risk seeing the toxic behaviors to see if there's any new developments in the rumor mill. After today, I think that's borne fruit. I saw one thread that was started simply by a spoiler tagged image with one word hidden in the spoiler tags. AZOTH. Now, this word activated my Pokemon theory brain like a sleeper agent, and if this word doesn't mean much to you, oh boy, get yourselves ready, because this video has been begging to be made. The reason why it hasn't been made yet is because it hasn't been really relevant for a while, so it wouldn't have made sense to make it until now. And before we talk on the nature of AZOTH, let's look at the picture that the Anon shared. So the image that was shown was an edited version of this image, and I'll show the edits in a minute, but I want to introduce the unedited version first so we have some context, as it ties into later discussion. This is the image of the third legendary in Scarlet and Violet. Or rather, this is a drawing of such that is found in the Scarlet and Violet books. It does not have a name, and the only information we know about it is you can actually find written down by the professor in the research stations in Area 0. It is mentioned the Pokemon it is comprising are made of hexagonal shaped plates, and its drawing here shows that this is very much the case, but that it's also related to the terrestrial phenomenon. Eagle-eyed folks would also notice that there are a pair of eyes here whenever a Pokemon terrestrializes. Plenty of folks have theorized that this is related to the third legendary, and honestly, I could see this here as being some sort of remote way it manifests. Now, this image I've known about, and it wasn't this image alone that brought forth this video. Well, what did? Now, let me show you the edited version. This here is Zygarde. This is the third legendary of Pokemon X and Pokemon Y, and if I'm going to be most accurate, this is 50% Zygarde, as it has multiple forms based on how many of its cells are gathered and reformed into one. This third legendary here has a lot of visual design similarities to Zygarde in its perfect form, especially that hexagonal pattern that as a design element is very unique to one specific Pokemon. There are Pokemon that have hexagons in their designs, like Meltan, sure, but that's more of a side effect of its dome being a nut, rather than hexagonal shapes being a core part of its design, like it is with Zygarde. Hexagons are everywhere with this slithery boy. So, what does that mean, and why did this user write AZOTH to accompany this image? Well, let me explain to you how this fits in. But I'll work from beginning to end to really thematically tie this into the idea of AZOTH. In Pokemon X and Y, the origin game of Zygarde, we learned the plot of Team Flare. They plan to re-engage what is known as the ultimate weapon to bring a total genocide to the environment and its ecosystem to make the world a more beautiful place. Nice. Keep this thought in mind, as we'll be coming back to it. The ultimate weapon itself is of great note. It was constructed by the original king of Kalos, a man that we only know in the modern era as AZ. This is definitely an alias, but its symbolism is not lost on us. AZ is here from the beginning of Kalos' story to the end, from the beginning of the war to the end, from the beginning of time until the very end. This duality of before and after is going to be a recurring element, A to Z. The ultimate weapon was not originally a weapon, but instead an instrument that could revive Pokemon from death. Its creation stemmed from the death of the king's partner Pokemon, Floette, and she was killed during the Great War 3,000 years before the events of the game. He set out to create that which could return life to his closest friend, and yet it required a large amount of power to use its functions. It required so much power that it sucked and drained the life force of thousands of Pokemon, those whose graves lie in the eternity of Route 10 in Kalos. Upon learning of the cost of her revival, Floette leaves the king, breaking the remaining piece of his heart. Now, from this point, multiple things happened at once. Due to his exposure to the vast amounts of energy, the king grew immortal, and is why we can interact with him in X and Y, and this is why he took up the name AZ. Next, out of grief, anger, and a desire for vengeance for the others who had caused the original death of his beloved Pokemon, he converted the original device into the weapon we see it as in the present, outfitting its design with a very familiar floral motif out of the memory of his old friend. The king then used this weapon and fired it, attempting to end the war by annihilating both sides. Keep in mind that the weapon was stated to be fired on Kalos' enemy at the time. We will also return to this idea shortly. After these events, AZ left, searching for his long-lost friend, and the king's younger brother later buried the weapon deep underneath the town that would become Geosenge to avoid its future use. This, of course, would fail to keep the weapon hidden, as Team Flare and its boss, Lysander, would go on to uncover the weapon and draw on the necessary power to fire the ultimate weapon once more. However, his attempts are mostly thwarted, as Callum or Serena stops his plan just in time, cutting the largest source of power supply by capturing Xerneas or Yveltal. Now, a quick fun fact: Lysander from X and Y is a direct descendant of AZ's younger brother, meaning AZ and Lysander are related. Now, there is a bit of a split in what happens here depending on which version you're playing, which could be important for future events, so I'll detail them both. In X version, after capturing Xerneas, Lysander attempts to use the remaining energy to direct the blast from the weapon up and hit the Team Flare secret HQ, and make Lysander, the player, and their friends immortal, just as AZ did 3,000 years ago. In Y version, after capturing Yveltal, Lysander attempts to use the remaining energy to direct the blast from the weapon to hit the Team Flare's secret HQ and kill everyone inside. Now, with both of these threads, the beam does not do as Lysander desires, but it instead falls back on itself at Geosenge and makes a crater of the town, burying Lysander within the rubble, presumably killing him. Now, I say presumably, because it is possible that within the timeline that Pokemon X takes place in, Lysander could have theoretically lived if he was close enough to the weapon, similar to AZ's exposure. However, due to Lysander being paired with Yveltal and Pokemon Masters, I'm gonna run with the assumption that Pokemon Y is the canon version until further notice. Now, what does this have to do with AZOTH, or with Scarlet and Violet? Well, I'll get there soon. All this culminates at the end of the story where AZ reunites with his beloved Floette, and this Floette is actually a Pokemon that is coded into the game's data. It's a separate species of Pokemon to normal Floette, and it cannot evolve into Florges, and Flabebe cannot evolve into AZ's Floette. Its stats are higher than a normal Floette's, and its cry is slightly different as well. It had a unique move that it could only learn, called Light of Ruin. This is a base 140 damage fairy type move, which does recoil, kind of like the new move Steel Beam, but it essentially recreates the blast from the ultimate weapon. This Floette was never officially released in any Pokemon game whatsoever. Its data remained in the other 6th generation games, and even it had a unique Pokédex entry in the Generation 7 games. All this, plus its exclusive move, remains in the game's data to this day in Scarlet and Violet, even when other moves have been specifically removed from the game's data. This move even got a full new animation in Generation 7 games. Now, I know you're going to hate me for saying this, but keep this in mind. This will all become relevant soon. To end off the discussion of X and Y, Professor Sycamore theorizes that Mega Evolution is caused by the radiation from the ultimate weapon seeping into evolution stones, and these would become the Mega Stones that we know today. Okay, next we're going to slide on over to Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where we learn of the plans of Team Magma and Team Aqua. Entering their secret base, you can learn through some journals kept by the leaders the name that you would plan, Project AZOTH. The plan to return the world to its ultimate beginning by using the power of Kyogre and Groudon, and the phenomenon Primal Reversion. This is an intense disambiguation of Mega Evolution, where the Pokemon reverts to itself from ancient times, and it was Maxie and Archie's desire to see this energy used to bring the world to much the same state. AZOTH, AZ, from beginning to end, from end back to beginning. This much is seen when we meet the new character in this story, Zinnia, another type of flower, and this already flowerful symbolic trait, and her name begins with Z and ends with A. Also, Alpha and Omega are the equivalent to A and Z in Greek, from beginning to end. So these ideas are still thoroughly entrenched with the previous thought themes that were in X and Y. Also, AZ himself is referenced in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire by Wallace near the end of the game, as he has traveled to the Hoenn region and planted the seed that became the tree near the Cave of Origin. So with this, I bring to you the huge tie-in that syncs all this together, Infinity Energy. Infinity Energy is first coined by Mr. Stone, the father of Stephen Stone and the president of DevonCorp. In the original Ruby Sapphire Emerald release, this man was nothing more than a signpost to give you your Pokénav and eventually the experience share. In the remix, however, oh boy, this man. So, in the Delta episode post-game, we learn from Joseph Stone. Wait, his name's Joseph? I have lived my entire life thinking his name was Devon, because of the Devon Corporation. Anyway, Joseph tells us that his grandfather, who I'm now headcanoning as the new Devon Stone, as he was the original president of DevonCorp, learned of the ultimate weapon and the immense power used to fire it, and he desired to use that energy for the betterment of mankind. This became the standard power source for a lot of technology that the DevonCorps began producing. And the Devon goods that you help steal back from Team Magma or Aqua in the beginning of the game is actually parts for a motor to power a submarine using Infinity Energy, the same submarine that the teams steal later on in the story. Infinity Energy is also what powers technology like Moss Deep City's teleporters in the gym, as well as the space station that's been developing test flights for. All this is fine and dandy, but then we get to the matter of the abandoned ship, which in the remix is named the Sea Mauville. Yeah, we can learn quite a lot of the history of Devon's internal use of Infinity Energy through confidential documents found aboard the ship. In Room 2, depending on which version you're playing, you can find fragments of these documents that have worn away due to the nature of the ship's abandonment. Compile them both here. Devon's Secret Investigation Report. The development on new energy turned out to be true. The energy that uses Pokemon's bioenergy is called Infinity Energy. Investigation report on Watson. A series of actions related to cancellation of the new Mauville project turned out to be true. I recommend prompt disciplinary action against him as a traitor to our group. Doc, Team E leader, operative group. Okay, so this is quite a lot, and it may not seem like it, but Watson here is the electric-type gym leader of the Hoenn region in Mauville City, so it seems like he was tasked for contract work under DevonCorp to investigate the use and development of Infinity Energy, but was deemed by Doc to be traitorous to Devon's desires. Doc, if you didn't know, is the man you first attempt to deliver the Devon goods to in Sleepore City, before handing them off to Captain Stern. And yes, they are boat people, and their names are Doc and Stern. Another stack of old papers we can see are a service invoice to Devon for work on the Sea Mauville. And while the note is marred by damage, we can see Professor Cosmo from Full Arbor was tasked with the project's development, and he's billing an amount for overtime pay, showing that work aboard the Sea Mauville was full of long and hard hours. Another interesting note with this Cosmo deals with an apology notice he drafted, as he states he's responsible for the loss of the odd keystone that was donated by the Warburg Mine, a location from Sinnoh. Now, this plays into the rest of the articles you can find in the Sea Mauville. There is a magazine clipping that shows a news headline of when the new Mauville project was officially cancelled, and now we can paint a more full picture here. New Mauville is a location that is closed off and sealed to the public come the time of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The attempts were to power an entire new city using infinity energy, and this explains why Watson was in charge of the project under Devon. However, long hours and overtime led to the overall exhaustion of the team, and according to Doc, one of the overseers of the project, Watson's decision-making was not in alignment with the rest of the team. All this, and an odd keystone, a vessel to house the Pokemon Spiritomb, went missing aboard the ship. Now, we'll get to Spiritomb in a second, because I actually made a little bit of a false admission earlier in describing Professor Cosmo, as I just needed to introduce him first to have the next bite of information make sense. We can find a series of 5 letters written from a small child to his father, and the truth is that Professor Cosmo, we know in the game, is the small boy who is writing the letters to his father, Raizo Cosmo, aboard the Sea Mauville. I'll read the letters now. Dear Daddy, how are you? Are you working really hard? I'm doing well. I'm doing all my homework, and I'm helping at home too. Mommy's working hard and makes us dinner every night. Do you have to work this weekend? Are you going to come home? If you come home, take me to see the star show, okay? Techo Cosmo. P.S. I'm going to send you the picture I drew at the trainer school. It looked like another letter, but it's a drawing. The drawing is of a boy's face, and written next to it are the words, I love you, Daddy. Dear Daddy, how are you? Are you working really hard? I was sad that you didn't come home last weekend, but Mommy didn't seem so sad. She went out with her friend. I finally got that telescope that I've been wanting. It was from you, wasn't it? Thanks, Daddy. I really, really wanted it. I like looking at the sky, Daddy. When I look at the stars, I wonder if you're looking at the same stars too. Let's look at the stars together next time you come home. Techo Cosmo. Dear Daddy, how are you? You aren't working too hard, are you? You never come home anymore. I'm worried if you're okay. Mommy goes out with her friends a lot. It seems like fun, so I guess she's doing okay. The shell gun you gave me evolved the other day, but I liked it better when it was a shell gun and it looked like a meteorite. Salamence was kind of a letdown, so I asked a friend to trade it for a Soul Rock. Sorry, Daddy. I know it was a present, but I think Soul Rock is cooler. When it gets dark tonight, I'm gonna look at the stars again. I'll think of you when I do. Techo Cosmo. Dear Daddy, I was really, really happy to get to meet you the other day. It was so fun playing together again, and going to see the star show too, even if it was just the two of us. I was sad that Mommy couldn't go, and even more sad when you and Mommy fought that night. I'll study hard, just like you told me, and I'll be a good boy, so don't fight. But let me keep watching the stars, even if I have to do all my homework too. When I grow up, I want to be a professor and study the stars. Techo Cosmo. Dear Daddy, thank you for writing to me. I'm doing really well here, too, so please don't worry about me. I hope I'll see you again someday. I dream about it all the time. I brought the telescope you brought me to our new house. Please don't work too hard. Daddy, I hope you are okay. I will always, always love the stars, and I will always, always love you. Techo Cosmo. P.S. I'll give you my High Skitty doll. Please take care of it for me. It looks like another letter, but it's a photo. There's a little boy holding a telescope with a woman beside him, looking bored. So, it seems like not all was well for Professor Cosmo in his personal life, and the catastrophe of the sea marvel only served to make things worse. Okay, so now for the biggest info drop of the sea marvel. Spiritomb. Spiritomb is a Pokemon that is bound to the Odd Keystone, and it contains 108 damned souls into one combined entity of malice and regret. Inside the sea marvel, there's a singular room, the same room where you find the apology notice, in fact. If you check in your bag after reading the apology notice, then you see the Odd Keystone appear behind you, and interacting with this will encounter Spiritomb. Now, when this came aboard the ship, it was just an Odd Keystone, and now we have a crash ship with no one on board. We know not everyone on board died, as Watson is still alive to manage the Mauville trim, but with the Spiritomb's existence here, we can assume that 108 workers aboard the project did die because of these infinity energy experiments, and their souls became trapped within Spiritomb. And this fact is why Devin and the project have kept details of the project's cancellation a secret, and why the new Mauville project got shut down before its completion. Now, it's possible that those dead could be a mixture of human and Pokemon, or it could be entirely Pokemon, as infinity energy is comprised of Pokemon bioenergy. But the truth remains that 108 victims were because of this project. Now, the last topic on infinity energy I want to bring up is the end of the Delta episode. A large asteroid, more than 6 miles in diameter, is on a collision course with the planet, and the initial plan devised by the Moss Deep Research Station, a facility funded and owned by the Devon Corp, mind you, planned to fire a rocket toward the asteroid that is packed with infinity energy, enough to power a dimensional shifter that would, upon making contact, send the asteroid to a parallel universe, thus saving Hoenn from total destruction. Zinnia, the character we mentioned a bit ago, is against this plan, and she argues that this plan would essentially be dooming another version of Hoenn to the asteroid's impact, as they would have no way to defend against it. This bit of dialogue goes back and forth and confirms the Pokémon multiverse, as each game exists in a separate timeline, meaning that Zinnia is correct. The original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald games all exist in their own alternate timelines, and in these timelines, Devon Corp is not known for their development in infinity energy, thus explaining why Mega Evolution does not exist in these older titles, as it is the direct connection with the timelines that have X and Y's events play out, where their histories where infinity energy is uncovered and developed. So the plan then becomes to take to the Sky Pillar, where they will challenge Rayquaza and convince it to help by Mega Evolving itself to destroy the asteroid before it makes contact. Now, we have a lot of information that we just learned from these games alone, but I'll quickly summarize the key points that we'll be following back up on. The ultimate weapon was built in the shape of a flower to honor the memory of AZ's Floette, and it requires Pokemon bioenergy to power. AZ used this weapon to fire on Kalos' enemy during the Great War, and during it he gained immortality. AZ is a symbol for the beginning and the end, a massive change in time. Devon Corp then repurposed infinity energy for everyday use and became a tech giant, who then proposed they save the world by redirecting the asteroid into one of the older Pokemon games' timelines. Now we're going to head to Ultra Sun and Ultramoon, where we're introduced to Team Rainbow Rocket. This is a villainous team that is helmed by none other than Giovanni, but he, like the other team admins that have been gathered from previous Pokemon titles, all come from alternate worlds, separate from the ones that we encountered in the games they appeared in. This is a direct follow-up to the Delta episode storyline revelation of the Pokemon multiverse, as these villains are all ones who have won in their respective timelines. They each have the legendary Pokemon that they were after at their disposal, and in the case of Maxie and Archie, they're using their old designs from Ruby and Sapphire versions, and not their more modern looks from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Getsus, as well, uses his design from Black and White, as opposed to his Black 2, White 2 design. As if they used this design, it would imply that he did lose to Hilbert and Hilbert in Black and White 1, which can't be if this is the version of him that wins. So to this Getsus, the events of Black 2 and White 2 don't even happen. After the defeat of the leaders here, the admins are banished back to their respective timelines, all except Giovanni. This is where things get interesting, as his words imply that he's going to take over another reality. This is a bit of a dual foreshadow, as he would then go to bring Team Rocket to our reality through Pokemon Go, and as well as his storyline in Pokemon Masters, is a direct follow-up to his defeat from the Rainbow Rocket days in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, with the very same Mewtwo he used from those games being his sync pair. One more quick thing I want to add as a late addition to the scripts is the original Sun and Moon we learn of people called Fallers, people who have fallen through time across the dimensions, and Annabelle is one such person, as she originates from the original Hoenn timeline, as she was a frontier brain during the events of Pokemon Emerald. So not only are the alternate timelines aware of one another, but they're also able to be interacted with in more ways than just Infinity Energy. Now, Pokemon Masters is a huge grab bag of events because its whole premise is that Hoopa, a Pokemon known for pulling people and Pokemon through wormholes, is assembling trainers from all across the multiverse to partake in its game's events. So we have a lot of different versions of trainers from all across the timeline, such as the Giovanni we mentioned, who comes directly from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, as well as the Lysander from Team Rainbow Rocket, as he is sporting that very same Yveltal he was using from that game. Either that, or it's a Sonder from Pokemon Wyvers. Okay, that was a lot, but it was all necessary, as we're now finally going to talk about Scarlet and Violet. There are some things I could talk about with Legends Arceus, but I feel we don't have the full picture for my thoughts on that game yet, so I'll keep those to myself, and I'll make an addendum video to this one, fully detailing my thoughts there. So, I believe Scarlet and Violet DLC will have us returning to Kalos. It's a big claim, and it's a claim that's been theorized in the community since Sun and Moon, honestly. Returning to Kalos has been a very common prediction, and up until now we have thought again and again it was going to happen, but again and again we've seen it not happen. First, I want to draw your attention back toward the connection to Zygarde and the third legendary I brought up at the start of the video. There's an obvious connection here between these two, and I think it's intentional. It's possible there's a new form of Zygarde that the professors witnessed from the past or the future, depending on which version you're playing. A form of Zygarde built to look like this orb with hexagonal plates. The fact that they're mentioning it as plates makes me think it's more canon to Violet, as I expect something like this would be more mechanical, kind of like the future Paradox Pokemon, which we'll get to those in a moment. So that would already be an interesting connection just by itself. But there are a few more points of interest I want to tackle to solidify the connection to Kalos, and we've been seeing for a while in Scarlet and Violet. First is the final area of the game, Area 0. It's of great interest, for the abbreviation for this area is AZ. And if it was just this by itself, I wouldn't think this anything more than a coincidence, but hold on tight, we're about to build a tower of coincidences. So, the great crater of Paldea, I believe, is the result of the weapon firing on Paldea 3,000 years ago in the past, and I believe the Empire of Paldea, as yes, they were an empire ruled by a king, as evidenced by the 4 ruinous legendaries, was Kalos' enemy during the Great War. With Kalos being based off of France, and Paldea being based off of Spain, their real-life closeness cannot be understated, and we know the real-world equivalents of these nations are taken into account for geography, as Kanto and Johto are near one-to-one models of those regions in Japan and their connectedness. Same with Hoenn and Sinnoh. So we can reasonably assume Paldea's proximity to Kalos exists. Now, this image here is a fan mock-up, but I believe it to be the most accurate rendition of how this world is set up. And it's very interesting in X and Y that we do not visit the region of southern Kalos, and in Scarlet and Violet, we have this northeastern region similarly clouded off. I theorize this region will be where the DLC focuses on or takes place. Need more proof? Well, let's dive into more Kalosian connections. Inside the Great Crater, we can find a bunch of interesting spawns here, one of which is the Pokemon Floette, but interestingly, not its evolution Florges. Keep this in mind. We also have one of the new Paldean Pokemon, Glimmora, primarily is found here in the crater. It's even one of the many boss battles you face before you enter one of the research stations, and it's the only Pokemon that has this designation that is not a Paradox Pokemon. This places emphasis on this Pokemon, as well as it being the champion, Geeta's ace Pokemon. On a quick side tangent, Geeta's team is also of note, as it comprises of largely Paldean Pokemon, but Interestingly, she has two Pokemon that are not Paldean native, Go-Go and Avalugg. Two very strange additions for her team that both originate from Kalos. Interesting. But back to the crater. I know Glimmora can be found near Alfornada, the psychic town, but they're a rare spawn down in the underground, and the largest variety of them are found in the depths of the crater itself. Glimmora is a Pokemon that is heavily related to the terrestrial phenomenon in Paldea, in which specific crystals emit a mysterious energy that Pokemon can attune to that change their typing when interfacing with the human creation Terra Orbs. Glimmora's Violet's Pokedex entry states, Glimmora's petals are made of crystallized poison energy. It has recently become evident that these petals resemble Terra Jewels. Okay, so a direct connection between the Terra crystals and the Pokemon itself. Now that that information is out there in the open, I want to briefly mention another quick Kalos connection before we talk about Paradox Pokemon, and then finally we'll be able to move forward tying everything together. So, when the Pokemon Home update comes to us in the spring of 2023, we're going to be getting a swath of old Pokemon we can bring in from Pokemon Home, but they won't be registered to the Paldean Pokédex. These include the Hisuian Pokemon and starters, and the modern versions of those starters, Typhlosion, Samurott, and Decidueye. I bring these three up because their modern versions are only being added because their Hisuian versions are being added, and the other starters of their normal modern generations are not being added in. So the Tepig, Snivy, Litten, Popplio, Totodile, and Chikorita lines are not being added into these games with the home update. This is an important distinction, because there are only 4 other starter lines that are being added in. One being Charizard during the raid event in December, and let's be honest, this is because it's Charizard, and we know he's the poster boy for the starters. I mean, that's why the first event is centered around EV. But the other 3 that are being added in with home, Greninja, Delphox, and Chestnut. The Kalos starters. I wonder why they decided on these totally random starters. Anyway, I'll let you make of that what you will. But now we'll talk about Paradox Pokemon, and then tie these ideas together. Paradox Pokemon are Pokemon that were drawn in from either the ancient past or far future, by virtue of a time machine created by Sada and Turo. In both versions, these two are working on the experiments together, and then depending on which version you play, one of them leaves, the other and their child Arvin, to go on to be a deadbeat parent. The remaining scientists sees the workload as too much and isolates themselves from Arvin, and then constructs an AI with robotic interface of themselves to make the actual work that the other had to left with. During this process, the first Pokemon is brought back from the past or the future. In the Scarlet version, Sada brings back Koraidon from the past, an ancient form of the Pokemon Cyclizar. In Violet version, Turo brings back Miraidon from the future, a future form of the Pokemon Cyclizar. The success in their research would continue, as they would bring forth another Koraidon and Miraidon back from their respective times. But this one was more territorial than the first, and had ensued in a grand fight in the 4th research station. Sada and Turo in their respective versions would give their lives to protect the first Koraidon, Miraidon, and the AI Sada and Turo would remain down in Lab 0, and would facilitate the saved Koraidon/Miraidon to be handed off to Arvin, who would have it during the beginning of our adventure through Paldea. This of course heightens Arvin's story arc, as, on this journey back, his Mabustiff was similarly hurt by a Paradox Pokemon, and this damage to his best friend, plus the saddled responsibility of taking care of his mom's/dad's project, led to his growing resentment of his parents, and said Pokemon, and his continued isolation. Now, before their deaths, Sada and Turo had programmed the time machine to run autonomously, grabbing Pokemon from the past and future, and ensuring their capture by using Master Balls, as they themselves could not use the time machine to travel through time, as it did not have enough energy to bring humans forward or back from the past and future respectively. So they had to use matter as small as possible, ergo, Pokeballs. So the machine continues to run autonomously, and Paradox Pokemon from both eras begin to flood the present. Sada and Turo also programmed safeguards for their machine being shut down by outsiders, as they believed their work was contributing toward a paradise, and the results of their experiments causing lasting far-reaching damage to the ecosystem, and they believed that it was simply part of life's natural course. It isn't until Arvin, you, Penny, and Nimona assist the AI Sada/Turo in ending the dead professor's wishes and overcoming the AI's programming, and our fully powered-up team of Paradox Pokémon to put an end to the Time Machine's actions. And even after you overcome their teams in the second Koraidon-Miraidon, it isn't until the AI attempts to atone fully for their counterparts' actions by entering the Time Machine themselves, knowing they can never return to this time, that the Time Machine can finally be stopped, as the AI units exist in the present, is a key for the Time Machine's functions. One thing of note is the Zero Lab exists at the very bottom of the Grid Crater, where the crystals responsible for the terrestrial phenomenon originate from, and the crystals have overgrown the lab itself, showing that there's actual organic material for these crystals, and they can grow. And it's actually due to these crystals that the Time Machine was even able to function at all, as they greatly magnify the energy to make such a miracle possible. And it's here where we can finally make connections. So, the big elephant in the room is the fact I mentioned before. I believe Paldea was Kalos' enemy in the Great War, and that the crater exists as a result of the ultimate weapon being fired. Now, there exists one complication that I may have an explanation for. Throwaway dialogue reveals the soil composition of the crater, when analyzed, states that the crater has existed for about 1 million years. Obviously not quite the 3,000 years we would need for the ultimate weapon firing, but I think I can work with it. If this is the case, then I can posit that the weapon did fire, and it did hit where I think it did. Maybe it didn't create the crater, but it could have magnified it, especially seeing what was left of Geosenge X and Y, a crater. Plus, it's possible that this is the origin point of the crystals and form its most deep layers within the crater, as that would be where the impact hits the hardest, and not just the crater itself. Now, connecting this thread, I believe the crystals that comprise the terrestrial phenomenon and the end result of the weapon's discharge by way of infinity energy are one and the same. Think about it. The amplification of technology is the exact purpose of the Devon Corp from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and it made them the checkpoint that they became. And they were able to power submarines, rocket ships, even teleportation. The Time Machine isn't out of reach for this kind of limitless power. It's literally called infinity energy. And you wonder why Zygarde would be connected to the terrestrial phenomenon by way of this third legendary? Because its modern form originated in the country where the weapon originated in. And ever since X and Y, the third legendary has had everything to do with the main energy source or gimmick. Rayquaza was able to Mega Evolve. Necrozma utilized its C-move in its Ultra form. Eternatus was the source of Dynamax energy. And yet, Zygarde was always the odd one out, only fully reaching its max potential in Alola of all places. So in fact, it being the only legendary to have lore in the other regions like this would fit perfectly in its appearances in Paldea, or even in the southern edge of Kalos that intersects with Paldea could unveil this third form. Now, there is one complication that arises with this third legendary that I also believe I have an explanation for. In the notebook, you learn of this creature's name. It is redacted and contains 6 characters, and as we know, Zygarde contains 7 letters. However, this name was given to it by Sada and Turo, as are the other Paradox Pokemon. This isn't Donphan, this is Great Tusk. And this isn't Donphan, this is Iron Treads. It's fully possible this 6-letter name is what Sada and Turo named this form of Zygarde upon its discovery. Now, connecting this would explain why the crystals can connect with the Pokemon of the Paldea region. If these crystals are the remnants of the radiation from the infinity energy having crystallized, and infinity energy is sourced from Pokemon bioenergy, as confirmed by Watson and researcher Cosmo aboard the Sea Mauville, it would stand to reason that would make perfect sense why Pokemon could tap into this power. It's their own energy. Next, I want to talk about 2 specific Paradox Pokemon, Iron Valiant and Roaring Moon. These are the Paradox Gallade and Salamence respectively. These 2 are paragons in their own right, as they are the strongest currently released Paradox Mons outside of Koraidon and Miraidon. But fans have been quick to note, and even noted in their Pokédex entries, that these designs remember their modern incarnation's Mega Evolutions. Now, do you remember that theory Professor Sycamore had on the origin of Megastones and Mega Evolution? He theorized that Megastones were the result of infinity energy irradiating onto Evolution Stones, and Mega Evolutions are the byproduct of infinity energy in Pokemon. So, why do we now have Pokemon that were brought to this time by technology of these crystals that look like they're Mega Evolutions? It's because it's the same energy, just formed differently. I believe these Paradox Pokemon are so much stronger than the wildlife around it, and why they cause such a threat for the environment is because they've been affected by the crystals, the infinity energy. It's sort of like how primal reversion is a disambiguation off of Mega Evolution. Pokemon becoming much stronger by reverting to past strength or future strength. So, one quick deviation. Do you remember the motivation of Sada and Turo? They wanted to create their own ideological paradise. Fuck what happens to the environment and the ecosystem around it. This is an exact echo of Lysander to Team Flare, who wanted to create his own ideological paradise, where the world's natural beauty could be restored at the expense of everything else. This also echoes Archie and Max's goal with Project AZOTH, return the world to the beginnings and their natural beauty at the expense of everything else. End to beginning, beginning to the end, A to Z, Z to A, Alpha to Omega, future to present, past to present, area 0. It's the same thematic idea coming back and echoing forward. We are following a continuous storyline, and we are seeing the events that happened 3,000 years ago still come into play here with the events of infinity energy on the planet. Remember me mentioning how Floette appears in Area 0, but not Florges? Looks a lot less like a coincidence now, doesn't it? Oh yeah, and on the nature of AZ's Floette, what differentiates this Pokemon from the Paradox Pokemon we know now? It's a Pokemon from a time long ago that looks like a normal Floette, but has had its design changed due to its survival and exposure to infinity energy. Its stats are higher than a normal Pokemon, and for all intents and purposes, is considered a different species altogether, as it cannot evolve into Florges. Paradox, Jigglypuff, and Misdreavus act in this exact manner. They are visually similar to their modern counterparts, but cannot evolve into Wigglytuff or Mismagius like their modern counterparts. Interestingly enough, these are Pokemon whose normal counterparts all evolved using Evolution Stones. A Moonstone for Jigglypuff, a Dust Stone for Misdreavus, and a Shiny Stone for Floette. So, why can't they evolve? Well, it's because these Pokemon have evolved, at least in a way you might not initially think. It's my theory that Paradox Pokemon are a form of permanent Mega Evolutions similar to primal reversions, and my evidence is their heightened stats and ability to evolve further. So, you can think of this as an ancient Donphan, an ancient Jigglypuff, or you can think of it as Mega Donphan past, Mega Jigglypuff past, and Mega Donphan future. And finally, going back to the topic of Glimmora, we learned before how closely related it is to the terrestrial phenomenon, right? Well, get ready for this. Glimmora is floral in shape for a reason, and that reason is twofold. First, a tie back to the ultimate weapon, and Floettes that cover Area 0, but also because shiny Glimmora almost perfectly resembles the ultimate weapon itself. And its text entry in Scarlet mentions how it fires off beams using the energies collected. Very interesting. Also remember, Light of Ruin is still in this game's move data. I just wanted to bring that point up again, just in case you forgot. Second is the hidden talent of sunflowers in the real world. As it turns out, sunflowers are fantastic at cleaning up radioactive waste from the environment, as in real life they are actively combating the areas contaminated around Chernobyl during its nuclear meltdown. And Glimmora can be found in the lowest levels of the Great Crater attached to the cavernous walls, and near the Terra crystals. I believe their formation is due to the heavy amounts of irradiated infinity energy that crystallized, because this connection wouldn't make too much sense if these crystals were natural, right? It's a flower because it's radiation. Glimmora is poison type because it gets its power from the irradiated energy. And its obvious importance, again, is highlighted as early as the champion fight, where, again, Geeta uses primarily Paldean Pokemon and Kalos Pokemon. Now, there are 2 additional Paradox Pokemon that we've yet to meet in the DLC, being Suicune and Virizion, but I currently don't have enough information on their Paradox forms, and don't think their modern forms tie easily into this massive set of theories, so I will wait until we learn more about them to see if they slot in or not. And if so, I will add them to that addendum video. And that's about it for now. I believe Kalos is going to feature pretty heavily in this DLC, and some form of Zygarde is going to return for the 3rd legendary, and will continue the tale of Infinity Energy as Terastallization comes forth. But before we go, I want to make mention of one final tidbit. Ku is a riddler slash leaker who is pretty prominent in the leaking community. They've had a perfect track record leaking things via riddles since before Legends Arceus, and everything they leaked have come true for both Scarlet and Violet. And one riddle they showed was this, an image showing each of the 4 battle gimmicks and saying, which of these 4 is different? This was in a tweet on November 3rd, a little over 2 weeks before Scarlet and Violet released officially, and about a week before the ROMs leaked online. They would follow up this tweet with, if you failed to resolve it, you definitely would miss a lot. This tweet leaked so much. This was a DLC riddle in every sense, by the way. So we're being told pretty blatantly this riddle here is very important for the DLC and its premise. And going off of the video's case, I would argue that Mega Evolution is the odd one out here, as it was completely accidental in its formation, being a byproduct of the radiation on evolution. Now, people's guesses ranged from literally every choice possible for any number of reasons, so I won't go into specifics because we'll get the answer from Q himself when Saga on Twitter says, "It's okay, tell me the answer," to which Q responds, "Mega." So, we don't know what level of involvement Megas will have on the DLC, but if my theories are correct, this could easily be another piece of information to prove that Kalos will be important moving forward. Now, I temper expectations here. While it is possible they come back in usable form, it's also possible we face the situation where a trainer, or multiple trainers in the game, will use them against us, and they remain unusable for us. I don't know what form it'll take, but it seems like they'll be important in some way, and I'm excited to see that happen. Maybe we'll even get concrete confirmation that Paradox Pokemon and Mega Pokemon aren't that different from each other after all. But with that, I'm going to end things here. If any more news comes to light on any of these theories, I'll make up a follow-up video, but I'm so glad I finally got to share this side of the Pokemon lore and world building, because this is the kind of stuff I live for, and to see it built on game after game is super satisfying. I didn't even talk about everything involved with this, as I completely ignored the existence of Ultra Beasts, and multiple universes and dimensions they come from, and everything related to the Ultra Wormholes and Necrozma's domain. But I hope this helped inspire more theorists to come pick up the mantle where I leave it. If you like this content, feel free to check out the other content I have on here. I'm theorizing and analyzing other stuff that I tend to hyperfixate on, and I definitely aim to have more Pokemon content up in the future, including a Pokemon analysis generation by generation. Hope you have a fine day and are excited about the future alongside me. Check you guys next time.